Laziness is one of the most misunderstood labels people use. It sounds simple. Someone avoids effort, delays action, chooses comfort over responsibility. But when you look closer, the pattern is rarely that shallow. What we call lazy is often a surface behavior, the visible outcome of deeper psychological processes that are happening underneath. And once you start examining those processes, the idea of laziness begins to change. There's a certain kind of person who appears unmotivated on the outside. Tasks are delayed, opportunities are ignored, potential seems unused. From a distance, it looks like a lack of discipline. But internally, something more complex is usually happening. The issue is not always the absence of effort. Sometimes it's the presence of resistance that isn't immediately visible. The first psychological trait, often mistaken for laziness, is task aversion rooted in emotional overload. Some individuals do not avoid tasks because they don't care. They avoid them because the task feels heavier than it objectively is. This weight doesn't come from the task itself. It comes from how the mind interprets it. When a task is associated with pressure, uncertainty, or fear of failure, it becomes mentally costly. The brain doesn't just do this. It sees risk, discomfort, and potential negative outcomes. Avoidance, in this case, is not about comfort, it's about reducing internal friction. The second trait is low perceived reward. Motivation is closely tied to how rewarding an action feels. For some people, the outcome of a task does not create enough psychological pull. The reward feels distant, abstract, or insignificant. When the brain does not associate a task with a meaningful payoff, it struggles to prioritize it. This is why some individuals can work intensely on things they enjoy, while avoiding equally important responsibilities. It's not a lack of ability, it's a difference in perceived value. The third trait is cognitive overload and decision fatigue. Modern environments require constant decision-making. What to do, when to do it, how to do it. For individuals already processing a high volume of information, even simple tasks can feel like additional strain. When the cognitive system is overloaded, the brain looks for ways to conserve energy. Avoidance becomes a form of regulation. It is not efficient in the long term, but it provides immediate relief. The fourth trait is fear of imperfection. This one is often hidden. People who are labeled as lazy may actually have high internal standards. The problem is not that they don't want to do the task, it's that they want to do it well. And when the gap between expectation and current state feels too large, starting becomes difficult. The mind anticipates that the result will not meet its own standard, so it delays action. This creates a loop. The longer the delay, the higher the pressure. And the higher the pressure, the harder it becomes to start. The fifth trait is learned helplessness or reduced sense of control. When individuals repeatedly experience situations where effort does not lead to meaningful outcomes, they begin to disengage. The brain learns that action does not change results. Over time, this reduces motivation. It's not that the person doesn't want improvement, it's that the connection between effort and outcome has weakened. Without that connection, initiating effort feels pointless. These 5 traits often interact. Emotional overload increases avoidance. Avoidance reduces reward. Reduced reward increases disengagement. Disengagement reinforces the idea that effort is ineffective. What looks like laziness becomes a self-reinforcing system. Another important factor is how people define effort. For some, effort is visible, physical action, time spent, tasks completed. But for others, effort happens internally. Thinking, processing, anticipating. This internal effort is not always recognized, even by the individual themselves. As a result, they may feel exhausted without having visible output. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. From the inside, a lot is happening, but it is not translating into action. There is also a difference between energy and motivation. People often assume that if someone is not acting, they are not motivated. But motivation requires energy. When energy is low, whether due to stress, poor sleep, mental load, or emotional strain, motivation decreases. The individual may want to act, but the system does not support it. This creates a mismatch between intention and behavior. Another layer involves habit formation. Consistent action requires stable patterns. When routines are disrupted or never fully established, each task requires more mental effort to initiate. This increases resistance. Over time, The absence of routine makes action feel harder than it needs to be. There is also a social component. Labels like lazy can become internalized. When someone is repeatedly described this way, it can shape identity. The individual begins to see themselves through that lens. This reduces effort further, not because they agree with the label, but because it lowers expectation. If the outcome is assumed, the motivation to change decreases. Interestingly, people who appear lazy in one context can be highly active in another. This suggests that the issue is not global. It is context-dependent. When tasks align with interest, clarity, and perceived reward, behavior changes. This reinforces the idea that laziness is not a fixed trait. It is a response to specific conditions. From a psychological perspective, what we call laziness is often a mismatch. A mismatch between task and meaning, effort and reward, expectation and capacity. When these elements are aligned, behavior shifts. When they are not, resistance increases. Another important factor is time perception. Tasks that feel too large or undefined create a sense of distance. The brain struggles to engage with something that has no clear starting point or end point. Breaking tasks into smaller, defined actions reduces this distance. It makes the task more approachable. Without this structure, avoidance becomes more likely. There is also the role of immediate comfort. The brain naturally moves towards states that reduce effort and increase comfort. In environments where distractions are easily available, this tendency becomes stronger. Choosing comfort is not always a conscious decision. It is often the default. Overriding it requires awareness and structure. However, it is important to understand that not all avoidance needs to be eliminated. Some level of resistance is normal. The goal is not constant productivity. It is functional alignment. Understanding why resistance occurs allows for more effective adjustment. Over time, individuals who recognize these patterns can begin to shift them, not by forcing effort blindly, but by adjusting the underlying conditions, reducing cognitive load, increasing clarity, redefining reward, and creating structure. These changes make action more accessible. Ultimately, people who are labeled as lazy are not always lacking discipline. They are often dealing with systems that are not aligned. Systems where effort feels heavier than it should, where reward feels weaker than expected, and where starting feels more difficult than continuing. And once you understand that, laziness stops looking like a character flaw. It starts looking like a signal that something in the system needs to change. Personally, I've always found that what looks like laziness from the outside often feels like confusion or resistance from the inside. There's usually a reason behind why something isn't happening, even if it's not obvious at first. And maybe the real shift begins when you stop asking, "Why am I so lazy?" and start asking, "What is making this feel harder than it should?" Because sometimes the answer isn't about pushing harder, it's about understanding better.